Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the virtual convening series hosted by the Sorenson Impact Institute. We're excited to have you all here with us for our partner discussion with Blue Haven Initiative to discuss policy-enhanced impact investing. My name is Lindsay Zazumbo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sorenson Impact Foundation. The Sorenson Impact Institute connects capital to impact through innovative finance structuring, impact measurement, impact strategy, and human-centered storytelling. The Institute is proudly housed at the University of Utah's David Eccles School of Business, where they also help to equip future leaders in impact. Today, I'm joined by our speakers, Liesl Pritzker-Simmons, co-founder and principal at Blue Haven Initiative, Louis Kaditz-Peck, Executive Director of the Responsible Business Lending Coalition, Ryan Werder, Executive Director of the Energy Action Fund, and Jacob Haar, Managing Partner at Community Investment Management. Lisa will lead our discussion today with our other speakers on amplifying returns through policy awareness and intervention. We will leave time at the end of this discussion for audience Q&A. With that, I would love to turn the time over to Liesl.
There we go. Sorry. It's only so many years on Zoom and I still can't find the mute button. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to the Sorenson Institute for hosting this discussion today. I'm really excited about it. We've got a really great panel here to talk about this conversation. So just by way of introduction, my name is Liesl Pritzker-Simmons. I'm the co-founder of Blue Haven, which is a single family office. We've been around for about 13 years now, and we were set up originally as a single family office focused entirely on impact investing. We invest across the returns continuum, but really sort of focus on market rate impact investing across asset classes and across sectors. But we also support that work philanthropically and with sort of catalytic capital impact first vehicles as well. One other thing, though, that Blue Haven has always historically done, but not many people in the impact investing space know about, is, and my husband, Ian, has really been leading this work for long before Blue Haven existed, is we've focused a lot on civic engagement, democracy building, and tax reform. So things that we think are wildly important from an impact standpoint, but are wildly inappropriate from an investment standpoint, a return-seeking investment standpoint. However, a lot of what Ian's work has focused on over the last several decades has actually been on youth voter turnout. And that's been something that's been near and dear to his heart since he was a student organizer. And he's focused on that largely on college campuses for a very long time. Anyway, I tell this story because a few years ago, I was asked to speak to a group of family offices who wanted me to talk about Blue Haven's climate-related investments. So we put this big slide together with all the different funds and all the different companies and strategies and the hundreds of millions of dollars that Blue Haven has invested towards climate in our market rate and our philanthropic portfolio over the past decade. So I'm going through the slide, and then somebody asked me a question, and they said, from an impact perspective, what's the best investment on this slide? Like, what's had the best ROI from an impact perspective? And I was looking at it, and it was right after the IRA got passed. And I was like, oh, no, it's not on here. It's Ian's youth voter turnout work. That is probably the best investment Blue Haven has made from a time, energy, money perspective. These things are all amazing and great, but perhaps that one might be the best. Again, let's not get into attribution questions here, but in terms of just sort of energetically, philosophically, it made me think, you know what? Why aren't we doing a better job at connecting the impacts of our investments with the kind of civic engagement, political engagement, and policy engagement that we have been doing over on our civic side? And so this kind of launched this project that Blue Haven has been starting over the past year or so, where we want to hear from some of our fund managers and some of our partners in the space. How can we, as a politically engaged single family office, be helpful to amplify their impact strategies using either policy, electoral work, C4 work? There's a range of different tools, certainly that family offices are able to use, that could amplify the impact of what our fund managers are trying to do. And so that kind of started what we're calling policy enhanced impact investing. We are just learning more about what exists in our own portfolio that we can lean into. And that's part of what this conversation is today. But we are particularly excited to hear from other investors, either who have been doing this, from other partners who want to engage impact investors in this space. Sometimes we find, at least I've found, the impact investing community, sort of comes from a business can solve everything standpoint. And I think the last few years in particular have been a very humbling moment for that. And so it's with sort of that approach, we're looking for partners, for other people to learn from, that I'd love to start this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jacob, first, because, and introduce yourself, please, to the panel as well. But, we are LPs, we're investors in your fund, and we knew immediately when we wanted to talk about policy enhanced kind of projects that our fund managers are engaged with, you should be our very first call. So tell us a little bit more about community investment management and the sort of extracurricular work that you're doing to support the impact of what your fund is trying to achieve.
Well, thanks so much, Liesl, and really appreciate you and Blue Haven and Lindsay and Sorenson putting this on so we can talk about this today. I think community investment management is a private credit asset manager focused on generating impact and commercial rate financial returns by investing in the part of the market which is broken for underserved communities, et cetera, and doing it in a way that provides financial access so that people can not only get capital, but hopefully create a lot of value within their communities. And we do that by working with fintech partners that are focused on responsible lending to reach folks for whom the system is broken. And as you mentioned, we've been really focused on policy as part of our theory of change from the beginning. And as we think about policy and advocacy work, it's as central to what we're trying to accomplish through our theory of change and how we deliver impact results for both borrowers and also for our investors. Hearing you talk about Ian and the Youth Voter Turnout Project, it's very similar for us as well, because when we talk about the investments that we've made, and we've invested now more than $18 billion in underserved communities, small businesses in the US and globally. But I think a lot about the highest ROI of impact, and it's much of the work that we've done is about trying to define what responsible lending looks like and then advocating for how to implement that, right? And so when we talk about policy, there's a few different ways that we talk about that and think about that. One is really about supporting innovation, right? We want to create space for new models to solve ways in which the world is broken. And so in that way, we're asking for, call it more space. We're asking for regulatory sandboxes and opportunities to do things in a different way. But at the same time, we also need to be advocating for regulation to keep up with many of the new ways that we're approaching things so that we don't just create new and innovative ways to rip people off. All right. And so it's the combination of those two and being fully engaged in that I think is so important. And a lot of our advocacy work has been around the Responsible Business Lending Coalition, which Lewis is heading up. And so I know we'll get more into that as well. But just really, for us, I would say that policy really is front and center as we think about creating that change, but doing so in a way that is fully rational with our investment goals too.
And do you ever get I'm just wondering, do you ever worry about getting pushback from LPs of, well, why are you spending time on this versus, keep your head down, just focus on the investment piece? How do you think about how those things sort of go hand in hand? Because to me, from an impact perspective, this is like spot on. But do you get any pushback from other LPs on this?
We haven't. I think that often LPs, as well as frankly myself, when we came to this space, had this idea that when you think of regulation, you think of it as risk, regulatory risk, and you think of it as compliance. You want to keep your head down. You want to make sure you're compliant with the rules and just avoid any discussion around policy or advocacy. But I think what we've come to appreciate over the last 10 years is that, engaging with policy is really about not only managing risk, and that is from a commercial perspective where I go with LPs, is that, look, managing risk for our investments, our partners, our borrowers is essential. When underlying customers, borrowers are getting products they don't understand, the investments perform worse, it creates more risk, and it's ultimately bad for our communities. And so, whether it's financial return or looking for the most community impact, I think there's a lot of alignment around trying to make sure that people have access to products where they can succeed, and that investors benefit from the benefit that's being created at the underlying customer level, right? That's sort of front and center. But yeah, I think often I would say for me it's been a little bit of a journey of figuring out how the power of our voice can really accompany our investments, and the investments give credibility to that voice. But often we can do so much more with our voices than we can by just keeping our heads down and investing.
Cool. And so maybe, Louis, I'll turn it over to you to please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the Responsible Business Lending Coalition, and maybe a little bit about how you connected with Jacob and Community Investment Management as well.
Yeah, thanks, Liesl. Yeah, I'll describe exactly how that worked with Jacob. The Responsible Business Lending Coalition represents about 1,000 organizations, investors, for-profit fintechs, civil rights groups, nonprofit lenders that help small businesses that are all working together to try and stop the rise of predatory small business lending and catalyze innovation of more and better financing options for small businesses because of the critical role that small business ownership plays in financial inclusion and class mobility and the stability of the middle class and so many other reasons, building generational wealth. So that maybe someday some of these small business owners can become impact investors, limited partners. So I started in this as an investee on the business side of Jacob's fund. I had proposed launching a small business lending program at one of the biggest fintechs in the US, Lending Club. And that was focused really on that underserved part of the market that Jacob's investment strategy is focused on. And so we developed this small business lending program that drew on my background in nonprofit community economic development. And we were seeing great results in terms of impact of, 5 times the representation of minority-owned businesses as compared to traditional lending and so on. And we had a strategy of being the lowest cost financing that a small business could get online. And basically that strategy really struggled because what we found is that our customers couldn't tell that we were lower cost than the competition because there's a giant wave right now in small business financing of the replication of practices from the subprime mortgage market in the lead up to 2008 and payday lending that's moved over into small business lending. And people are often really surprised to learn that some of the basic laws that we just know and count on, like the law, the Truth in Lending Act that requires a lender to tell you as a borrower what rate they're going to charge you, that law doesn't apply if you are borrowing for your business. And so our customers, we're taking on these small business loans, we would be telling them, great news, we're going to give you, we can provide you an APR of 20% or something like that. And we would be competing with but basically often companies that were charging, financing companies that were charging much higher prices, but obfuscating those prices. And so the problem here for Jacob's impact strategy in us to be successful was the policy environment, the regulations didn't have rules of the road that could enable that impact investment to be successful, that would enable apples to apples price comparison. And so Jacob got involved in helping found the Responsible Business Lending Coalition and bringing together this kind of unusual combination of for-profit and nonprofit voices to try to set the rules of the road such that small businesses can flourish, and that even these impact investments themselves can be successful.
And so I think one thing for me, like as an investor, what's really interesting is, I mean, we've been investors in community investment management for a really long time, and I've always known that there was that this work was going on, and that was really great. But then just recently, we've been able to engage even further, through Jacob, introduction to Lewis, and then actually be able to move some things forward legislatively as well. Maybe Lewis or Jacob, could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think this is a nice example of something that, as an investor, we were like, oh, we could help with that. Like we could help make a connection here or something.
I'm happy to take that, Jacob, unless you want. Yeah. So one of these policy campaigns that we're talking about is in the state of Illinois, trying to pass a law to provide price transparency for small business financing in Illinois, so that small business owners would know whether what is being hawked to them is in this giant category of financing where business owners are being charged, often 50 to 350% APRs. Those APRs are not disclosed to them. And the volume of that high cost, not transparent market is not a niche problem. This is 14 times the volume of SBA lending for amounts below $250,000. And we were talking about this, and through Jacob, we learned that Liesl has a lot of roots in Illinois and cares about that market, and saw basically where there was this great coalition built of civil rights groups and nonprofit groups and small business groups. But the campaign wasn't getting enough traction because it just needed a little support from some more kind of professional consulting. And Liesl made an impact investment that has already broken through and taken this campaign that was, trying to turn the gears of power into one that really had a hold of those gears and has broken through. And we're seeing a bill move forward that was blocked before. And if that bill passes, I just want to pull up a stat here. In terms of impact, we're seeing that particular bill in Illinois, we're projecting that it could save small business owners between $175 million and $835 million every year in unnecessary fees and interest that they would be overcharged, with huge benefits of that going particularly to Black and Hispanic business owners. I think we're looking at $112 million in savings for Black business owners and 104 for Hispanic business owners. But also it's just for the whole middle class and function of the economy and financial inclusion.
Cool. I guess the thing for me that's interesting about this is I know there's obviously lots of philanthropists and foundations that spend a lot of time, right, on research and policy advocacy. But I guess what I want to see more of is impact investors talking to their fund managers who all have impact theses. How do they become part of that conversation as well? And how do you get kind of, the impact-oriented private sector at the table, helping to inform that kind of legislation? And so now I want to turn it over to Ryan. And so Ryan, you can tell us a little bit about Energy Action Fund, But, I think one thing at Blue Haven, as we were starting out this project, we were like, well, the climate folks kind of have this locked up. They understand how policy creates markets, and how policy incentivizes investment. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about, are there some policies that maybe change markets, change investment behavior, things like that you can think of off the top of your head?
Yeah, absolutely. Ron Werder, I'm with Energy Action Fund, and we are the strategy and funding hub for America's state and local climate politics. We exist at the intersection of investors in the funding community, as well as the intersection point with the advocacy community. So we work really hard to understand what are the needs in the field that folks are experiencing every day, work to turn those into campaigns and match them to the interests of the donors who help create the resources to bring those campaigns to life. And for example, the instance that you were just talking about, Lewis, about bringing in some extra help, some professionalized consulting to break through, that is so important in this work sometimes. And oftentimes without that additional support of the investor community, it's difficult to take that across the line. When you ask for an example, though, like the thing that comes first to mind for me is the Inflation Reduction Act that just radically changed the game. This was the result of significant conversation, not just over 1 year, but the youth advocacy for sure, but truly years of building to a concept that was very different than how conservationists, environmentalists, energy advocates have approached this before. Instead of a stick-based approach, advocates were able to pivot into a carrot-based approach using industrial policy. And it was a chance where the needs of the field and the scientific realities that we need to meet in terms of the climate crisis collided in a lovely way with the opportunities to really build new wealth across America. And one of the things that brings me a lot of enthusiasm about this particular example is that this kind of work that is going to be bringing electrification, manufacturing back, it also swings open doors for clean lending. There's an enormous loan authority now to be investing new capital into clean energy work. And so the leverage to be able to do the advocacy work ahead of time, to unlock an opportunity like the Inflation Reduction Act, and then blow the doors wide open in terms of new capital in the field is such a huge leverage opportunity, huge return on investment, that I'm hoping that we start to see more of that kind of collaboration between the investment community and advocates, because I think this is a perfect example of the kind of scale that it can unlock.
And are you finding, so tell us a little bit actually more how Energy Action Fund, so as an investor who has exposure across different climate themes in my portfolio and in lots of different states and globally as well, how do I navigate, how do I learn where I should put resources to amplify kind of my investment goals? How do I know where to go?
I love that question. And it's to your point about like the climate team having our stuff together to be ready for this. We've been working really hard to organize advocates, and I don't mean just environmental advocates. These are folks who have investments and interests across the economy, to organize in state by state to be able to build towards a clear vision of that opportunity. Part of our job is to be able to pack that up and make it available to investors, because it is not easy to just drop into a state and be like, oh, where do I put my money to make the biggest impact? Energy Action Fund exists to help serve that purpose. I've got colleagues, my colleagues Heather and Tom in the chat, if anybody wants to chat with them. The point is that like we are here to help facilitate that, and we are not the only ones. There are advocates who are so eager to jump in on so many of these issues if you have specific pieces. Our job at Energy Action Fund is to look across the whole field and to help connect investors to the campaigns and opportunities that are bubbling up from the folks who really need to see that change in their community.
And are there, so Lewis, like from a business lending, like how would investors also on the other side, I mean, does Responsible Business Lending Coalition have a slate, have a way that investors who care about, good lending practices in the US can engage in this?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that, Lisa. One of the things that we're doing, having seen how impactful investors can be in the space, is to form an investors council to make it really easy for folks to just sign up and become a part of this and find opportunities for where they can weigh in. Something that might not be obvious at first is there's such low-hanging fruit here, because even for all of the philanthropic dollars that are out there, philanthropy is generally pretty reticent to engage policy. And so there are these opportunities, like small amounts of money can just have a massive impact. I don't want to put you on the spot, Liesl, because you're just getting into this, but it didn't take a lot of money to just not that much money to unlock this bill in Illinois that might save $835 million. And it's not the kind of thing that the philanthropy world can do. It takes someone who's got the accumulated capital and the mission focus of a philanthropy, but the flexibility that the investor world has, just to say, I see how this little check is going to really complement my other bigger checks in return. And so, you know, you can certainly talk to us about the impact, the Investors Council that we're forming, but these other ideas, Ryan, I mean, it's the bang for buck on being kind of one of the only voices that can fund policy work is so huge.
And so if I'm reading between the lines, you're saying C4 dollars are the most desirable?
I think someone else might be able to speak more on that. We don't even need to go that far. I mean, in the policy work that we do, we don't engage the electoral process at all. We're not advocating for or against certain candidates. We're just saying this is a bill that, you know, hey, small businesses deserve to know the prices they're going to pay, and we can just advocate for that bill and do that even as C3 advocacy, I believe. And gosh, if you're going to go into C4 advocacy, talk about low-hanging fruit there.
That's Ryan. I see you. Yes, chime in.
Yeah, well, thanks for the alley-oop on this one. There for sure is so much that C3 work can do, and philanthropy has played just an extraordinary role in advancing this. But there is still that chunk of work at the tail end of a campaign, or to build power throughout it, that can only be done with political dollars. And truly, investors have that capital, like you said, Liz, not philanthropy necessarily most of the time. And so it is this relatively open space with a huge ROI. Just to lean on the example in Illinois, when Illinois upgraded their entire energy policy, at the tail end of it, when we evaluated the 30-something billion dollars worth of impact, it was a 2,000 to 1 return on investment for the donors who put in to make that possible. And it's going to it's actively reshaping Illinois' economy to be more just, more clean, more resilient. It's wonderful. So I do really want to emphasize that this, to me, is part of why this conversation today is so important, because it is that C4 level of resources. I also want to say it doesn't necessarily mean you have to jump into the electoral arena. Sometimes the C4 work is just what you need to be able to actively lobby and say, I have a position on this bill that you are considering.
Well, and that, oh, sorry, Jacob, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I also think, I mean, in addition to the financial resources, going back to the point about just engagement and using your voice is really the key, right? So, I mean, it's terrific if you have resources and you can, you know, provide support to different organizations. But I think also, like to Lewis's point on the Investors Council, like just getting involved and being a participant in aligning your advocacy with the investments that you're making. Like the other, in addition to the RBLC, the other board that I serve on is Impact Capital Managers, right? And that's an organization that has 130 different members, which is involved in all types of different policy. But many, like I was 10 years ago coming to this, it isn't obvious to you how to essentially get involved. And I think that the key is, one, to just realize that the barrier to get involved is quite low. So, you know, whether that's IRA, Community Reinvestment Act, the Small Business Borrower Bill of Rights, like there's a host of issues that should relate to the particular policy work that may be relevant to you. And there's various different trade groups, whether that's, you know, ICM, industry coalitions, in our case, like the Responsible Business Lending Coalition. And so really important to essentially just, one, figure out that it is so easy to engage and get involved. And money that can be provided is terrific, but also just the barrier to that should be much lower, which is just a little bit of engagement.
Ryan, you want to jump in?
I just want to offer, like, it can also be fun to get in there. Like, you know more than your legislator does about whatever you're walking in there to talk about. They have to know all things on every policy issue. They're an inch deep. Getting in the arena and chatting with them and sharing your experience, why you're excited about it, I find to be a really gratifying feeling. And so I just really want to underscore, like, it's not always about the resources. It is an exciting moment for the legislator as well, to have an investor walk into their office and say, I care enough about you and your district that I want to share my opinion with you and my potential investment. And like, that is huge and can feel good.
And I think one thing that has been interesting, so when Blue Haven started this kind of project of how do we get more coordinated as, you know, across our whole portfolio with kind of what's going on, what is the low-hanging fruit, that if we knew about it, and we may already have actually like maxed out to that person, like there's also things like that that have quite frankly pissed me off, that I've been like, I didn't realize when we went to that fundraiser, I should have raised my hand and asked these 3 questions. I didn't know. And so there's our own kind of internal knowledge management that we're trying to figure out how to navigate. But one of the things that's been interesting, so we started by asking us sort of a series of questions to our US-based fund managers on, do you engage in policy work? How much does your team's, you know, either investment research or engagement kind of cross into the political realm? Is it, Jacob, as you were suggesting, really more of a risk framework? Or is there sort of an opportunity set that would enhance the impact of your investing? And we got such a wide range of answers from people like Jacob and CIM that are super engaged, to people who are like, are you kidding? I'm on Fund 1, please. Like, I'm just trying to get this, like, leave me alone. I've got enough going on, which fair enough, like, that's fine. One of the most interesting, I won't say the name, but is a very large asset manager that has an impact sleeve. Most of their work is not impact, but they have an impact fund. And when we started asking them about their policy engagement, knowing full well that the firm has loads of government relations people on staff, the impact fund actually did not seem to have any access to the government relations firm part of kind of the mothership. And of course, they were pretty anxious to even kind of answer any of those questions. They had a lot of compliance back and forth before they could get on the phone with us. But I thought that was kind of interesting and something else that we'll be following up on. But so I guess one other, are you finding, and maybe Ryan, to you, are you finding that are you finding a number of fund managers or investors, not just allocators, you know, sort of LPs like me, but also climate tech funds or other kinds of project finance facilities that are coming in? Are you seeing them at the table, or more kind of climate donors that you're engaging with mostly?
It's more climate donors. It's more the latter in the political space, where I've seen companies or investors come in has been more in the either C3, call it educational space, wanting to really present a clean, little conflict because they don't want to be upsetting policymakers. This is part of why I think the partnerships with advocates can be so powerful. Oftentimes advocates are fired up and ready to carry an argument into a conversation that investors on their own may not be. When I have seen investors come in, it has been very powerful. So one example that most comes to mind for me is in some of the earlier this decade of creating the renewable energy standards that are really driving a lot of the clean energy deployment across the country. There was a lot of pushback in states, like, why should we spend that money? Things seem to be going fine. A lot of it was driven by larger corporations that had clean procurement goals, 100% clean. And the presence of those investors, and they were showing up more as investors than employers in that conversation, made a real impact. It was a heavy counterweight to either the utilities or other heavy industry that said no. It brought a business case and an investment case that showed policymakers that the state had a path forward to growth in this, and that was really meaningful. I've seen some of that tail off recently, and that's again part of why I'm really hopeful about this kind of approach, is that for family offices and impact investors to start stepping in, we've seen how powerful it can be. you just got to get back at it.
And so we're coming up close to the Q&A time, but maybe just as a final question, just to shift a little bit, a slightly different but adjacent conversation. How would this kind of sort of getting more investor voice at the table with these kind of specific policies be hindered by all of the anti-ESG noise out there? In your advocacy work, how are you finding that to be something that's scaring people off, scaring legislators off in any way? Maybe Lewis, to you.
I think it's important to carry through the focus on affecting market practices broadly. That is part of that ESG work. And that can be done with different language. That's not language that just has happened to come up in the way that we do things. A lot of what our work to try to prevent the small business financing market from kind of going the way of the subprime mortgage industry is rooted in talking about establishing responsible practices and promoting innovation. And that's how we talk about it. And it's rooted in a set of practice standards that Jacob had referenced earlier for the industry that's called the Small Business Borrowers Bill of Rights. And so we had not only impact investors, but for-profit lenders in the market get together with small business groups and civil rights groups and say, these should be the standards for the market. And then we advocate for those standards. And that's how we get things done. And people resonate with it, I think, to the point Ryan was making, because when you articulate a path that's improving society and justice, that is also based in building prosperity, and industry is on board with that, and the nonprofit sector is on board with that, and investors are on board with that, policymakers want to do that. When investors come to the table and they're saying, we represent capital and we want to see this change, we think it's good for the market and it's good for people. Like, most of the legislators, they want to do what's good for people, but sometimes they feel constrained about, is this also okay for the market? Is this also okay for industry? And so when you come and you say, we are capital and we want this change to happen, that's just giving the legislators permission to do what they often want to be doing anyway.
I would just say also on that, this is really about transcending partisan politics, right? This is, and the, staying away from the anti-ESG or impact type of labels and focusing on what we're really talking about here, right? We're talking about job creation. We're talking about small business. We're talking about things that are very much bipartisan issues. These are very real world impacts, revitalizing excluded communities. These are essential issues for national security, energy independence, et cetera. And there's real bipartisan agreement on many of these issues. One of the things we've been doing at ICM is just meeting with different legislators to let them know, hey, this community of 130 investment funds has made over 3,000 investments in the US, including, by the way, in your districts. And folks are there for the ribbon cutting. Like, that is a bipartisan thing that everyone can get around. So I think looking for areas of commonality, common sense things. Yes, small business is one of these things that really does transcend party. It can be more complicated on the climate side, but I do think there are ways to engage and frame this that will last certainly any particular administration.
And I think on that front, this is one thing I've thought about trying to do also, what inspired by what ICM is doing is, like, at Blue Haven, like, could we even looking at our US portfolio district by district, like, where's our portfolio invested? Are there funky overweights that could possibly get us a meeting somewhere or something like that, or might hook in with what that particular fund or underlying company wants to do from an impact perspective in that case. And that's just not something that family office investors do. Like, we've got all kinds of pie charts about where, how to think about our portfolio from a construction standpoint. And that's not one of them. That is not a typical question, but could raise a lot of interesting questions within our own team. Ryan, go ahead.
I think as that thought process keeps hitting others as well, keep in mind that this is not a passive space. Policy is actively being made constantly. Legislators are sparking, reshaping, warping, creating new markets every time they vote. And so it's not really a choice of like, are you choosing not to be in it or to jump in it? Like, you're in it right now. Your investments are in it. So proactively finding like where you have district overlaps or other opportunities to influence that debate and how the markets are shaped seems a low-hanging fruit again.
Cool. Well, I think this is a great place to wrap up this part of the discussion and move to the Q&A. I just want to thank the three of you. This has been such a lovely conversation. We're learning. I'm excited to see what this group of listeners also has question-wise. But yeah, maybe I'll turn it over to you, Lindsay, to help with the Q&A.
Wonderful. Wow, what an amazing conversation. I mean, Liesl knows this. We spent a lot of time at the Sorenson Impact Group in the policy world. So I'm thrilled to hear this conversation. I feel like we're going to need at least 3 or 4 more of these discussions. So let's hope you all have some more availability in the future to dive a little deeper. Thank you so much for such a great, rich conversation. We have a lot of questions from the audience. So thanks to you all. I hope this has obviously been very informative. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Know that if we don't get to them live in the next 15 minutes, we will follow up via email with answers to your questions. So with that, why don't we kick right in? The first question is from Georgette Wong. Georgette is interested in learning how legislators can direct state treasurers and state investment boards or pension plans to address climate change and the intersection of health of people, animals, and planet. Who wants to take a stab at that? Okay, Ryan.
I'll give it a shot. I think this is a fantastic question and one that is not raised enough. The role of state treasurers and the influence they have on the scale of investment that states control is enormous. And so I'm really glad that you're thinking about this. A few things that I would suggest. First of all, everything we talked about today, talk to those legislators. You can talk to the treasurer, get in there. They rarely get visits from folks who want to talk to them. So go knock on that door. They probably don't have an appointment. And they are influenced by many other stakeholders around the edges. So I would also strongly consider thinking about who are the legislators that are sitting on the Appropriations Committee, who are the other participants that do the revenue estimating conferences. And folks like our team or other advocates like Ceres or Advanced Energy United live in this space and think long and hard every day about how to influence the outcomes in these. Don't underestimate governors either. They are often selecting the individuals who are populating these boards or sitting in leadership. So the takeaway for me on this question is that there is not a lever of policymaking that is not able to be discussed or in some way influenced, especially by the folks who are starting to bring capital into states and communities. So the doors will be open if you knock on them, and I would encourage you to start right away with the treasurer's offices. I think they'll be welcoming of that conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. I will say just one side note, we have a state treasurer here in Utah who is incredibly anti-impact investing and has been all over the local and national press, with his own views. And we've spent the last 8 months meeting with him, and his door was open and he welcomed it. And I can't say we've had a change of heart, but we're getting closer and a little bit more empathy on his side. So I agree with you on that front, Ryan. Okay, next question is from my dear friend and thought leader in this space, Anthony Bug Levine. He would like to know, who else beyond Blue Haven do you think is doing a great job of treating the resilience of our democracy as something they can help bolster, rather than an exogenous country risk in their valuation or pricing models? And thank you, Antony, for always using such big words.
So first, I want to be very clear. I don't think that Blue Haven is doing a great job. I think we're asking a question and starting to learn from our peers about how we can do it. And we just stylistically learn by doing. We don't get it all ready to go and then come out with a big thing. We're like, let's ask as we go so that we can learn as we do. And that's why I'm so appreciative of learning in public with all of you on this call today. But we are starting to see other, I think there's other institutions that have been, whether it's MacArthur Foundation's work on affordable housing, or whether Lafayette Square Foundation's, work, as well. I think there's a lot of philanthropic institutions who are way ahead on the sort of research and what the content of legislation and policy should be. But then there's a bit of white space we're finding with, as Ryan was referring to, kind of the kind of get her done piece at the final end that requires a little bit more flexible capital. And so that's where we really think as Blue Haven could be a good space for us to fill in. We don't want to, I can't tell you what affordable housing policy should be. And, we're not sector experts in that way. But I think through those kind of partnerships, I'm also starting to see, so I just left the Leaders Forum for the Impact, which is a network of family offices. And there were 2 panels, this Leaders Forum, one on democracy and one on policy and how it relates to people's impact investing in portfolio. And that was not the case a year ago. So starting to see some more interest in this. And, I just hope, particularly on the democracy side, the last couple of years have seen a lot of interest. A lot of foundations have added it to their, to where they want to focus. And that's really awesome. And I hope that regardless of what happens in November, that doesn't get suddenly deprioritized because perhaps a problem is perceived as being fixed. Ian would be the first to tell you that democracy is never sexy. The fact that it has become sexy in the last couple of years is news to everyone who's been working in the space for a while. And hopefully people will start to see that, regardless of what your issue is, if it's climate, if it's early childhood education, if it's the care economy, if it's healthcare, if we don't have a functioning democracy, it's never going to work. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but I'm sure there's probably folks on this call in the chat who are more engaged in this than Blue Haven as well. So anyone else too?
Yeah, anyone else? No? Okay. That was great. Thank you, Liesl. Okay, Bill Cook, he would like to know, are any of you using the phraseology social return on investment? The impact on the humans involved, the who's better off, how are they better off, how much are they better off questions.
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think we don't use that particular phrase, but in our world, we talk about financial health, right? And so that's a similar concept, which essentially looks at the idea that, is someone ultimately better off? And if so, how much better off are they? It's part of, as an impact investment manager, you think about evaluating your impact and having a feedback loop to both report on and manage that impact going forward. I think that, this is where responsible lending is so important because, one, you have to define, a lot of times in financial inclusion, even the term financial inclusion, you talk about access, right? Access to products, but access is not enough. In fact, we don't want access to products that extract value out of communities, right? So from our perspective, it's really about, understanding not only access, but also financial health and whether there was positive progression on that financial health journey. Measuring that is a whole other thing which involves surveys and many other things. But Lewis and I both have come from that world and think quite a bit about, how are we making sure that investments have that positive impact on financial health, or would be some type of a subset of that social return.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Brooke Heaton would like to know, what do you think are the most important / actionable policy changes that could help make impact investing more mainstream? That's a great question. Deep breaths from all our panelists while they dig in there. Lisa, I think you've got this one with all the work that you're doing.
This touches a little bit on some of the ESG, some of the anti-ESG stuff that is coming up. And there are all kinds of different responses that I see kind of the ecosystem doing, particularly led by US Impact Investing Alliance and Fran Siegel's work there. There's a rapid response fund that was put together, which we've contributed to as well, which I'd encourage others to take a look at. That's looking at some very specific ways to try to kind of stem the tide of this. There's also some interesting things popping up, some sort of like legal defense funds for funds that are, potentially either want to bring litigation forward or are defending themselves against litigation. But one of the things that I have seen, or it's interesting, particularly when we talk to more kind of mainstream investors or advisors or asset allocators, what I sort of keep hearing is that people's behaviors haven't necessarily changed. They've just like pulled a slide or two out. Like there's just some things that aren't getting highlighted in how they're approaching their kind of marketing materials, so to speak. So that's one thing that I've heard. But then there are, I think particularly for the states that have passed legislation where the pension funds in particular are not able to engage, that has meaningfully hurt a number of fund managers who have had, exits from their portfolio. So, I think, our stance at Blue Haven has always been that paying attention to more data makes us smarter investors. And so that's the simple approach that we've always taken when talking or when being in spaces with people that are anti-ESG, is just asking them why they think I shouldn't have access to the most information that I can get in order to make a decision about where to put my money. What I do with that information is up to me, but I should have it. And why does a legislator think that I don't deserve to have as much information as I can? The world is changing, and I need that information as an investor to make good decisions and rational decisions about my portfolio. So I try and keep it, out of any kind of impacty language, but and just bring it back to good information, data-based investing. But I think that is something, I don't know, I hear kind of a range of this is a massive existential threat on the one hand, and then also it's not that big of a deal. People will move through it anyway. So I don't know, I'll stop there. I don't know if others have a point of view.
I'm happy to add on to that, Liesl. I think that exactly your point, we need to continue making the market argument that these, it's not about a particular policy that's going to change, the way that impact investment is going to be adopted, but I think more recognizing that, these are good investments. Impact investments generally, that, the reason why folks are doing it, certainly within those of us who are focused on a market-based return, is not just ethical. it is also because this is a better way to invest over the long term. It's about mitigating risk, and it's about tackling the crises that we're dealing with in our world head on in a sustainable way where, ultimately the end customers are getting benefit out of it and increasing economic value for all stakeholders. And so I think, really framing the policy advocacy that is being done within the context of capital markets and mainstream commercial investing, in my mind, is what brings this to the scale that's needed to address the problem.
From my perspective, it's actually not a policy change. But if you're coming from my perspective on like the political engagement side of it, the doors are open. The lobbying is permissible. What I think can accelerate this is telling a stronger story. Let's pick some important policy fights that will advance these exciting investments and then talk about it. That will help invite others into the space and help normalize it, instead of it feeling like this is a weird or uncomfortable space to be in. This is how we shape the markets we exist in and invest through. So I think in addition to thinking of the policy changes that Jacob and Lisa were talking about, also just doing and then telling, I think is a really important part of changing the mainstream approach to this.
And I think, back to what we were talking about, even around like district mapping, of like, if I can show up at a legislator's door and say, okay, like, so we're invested in funds and companies that have created X number of jobs in your district. We should just go away then, right? Because, it's an impact fund or it's an ESG fund. We should destroy all those jobs according to you, right? You tell your constituents that's hard to defend. And so I think, some of this policy work too could help to mitigate some of that if we get a little smarter about, what we're talking about. It's not just, DEI and ESG, it's jobs in your district.
Yeah, this is such a thought-provoking question. And unfortunately, it's the one we're going to have to end on. I don't want to wrap this incredible conversation. It has been such a pleasure to share this afternoon with you all and have such a rich conversation. So thank you all for joining us. A special thank you to each of you. Just to let you all know, this video will be shared via email and on social media. And we will do our best to answer all the questions that we didn't get to in the chat box as well. And we just hope you'll join us again for one of the virtual convenings hosted by the Sorenson Impact Institute. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.